Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Vav Aleph, yeah.
Page, here we go. Okay, and these are the beginnings of rows. Two who began from the
Hold
middle
on,
of the
hold
row.
on, hold on. Aren't we on Vav Aleph? Or did I not move my
You didn't. Oh,
yeah, Vav Aleph today for Chazara.
okay, right. Okay. Beit Shammai says the renunciation of ownership in favor of the poor is a valid renunciation of ownership. Beit Hillel says it is not a valid renunciation of ownership unless it is declared ownerless in favor of the rich, also, as the Shemitah. If all the sheaves of a field are a kav, each and one is a four kavs, and he forgot it, Beit Shammai says it is not shicha, and Beit Hillel says it is shicha. The sheaf that is close to a stone fence or a heap to cattle or to implements, and he forgot it, Beit Shammai says it is not shicha, and Beit Hillel says it is shicha. At the beginning, of a row, the sheaf opposite proves if the sheaf that is held to bring into town was forgotten, they agree that it's not shicha. Okay.
Okay.
So now we
All
should be
right. So now we go into more explanation about what are the rows and when does Shikha kick in. Now this Mishnah, I remember from the first time we did it, is rather confusing because it uses the same terms for different things midway through the Mishnah. So just watch out for that. Okay, Elohein Rosh Hashanah. This is what we mean by the beginning of the row.
this is
Or at
going
least
north to south now. This is going north to south. Right?
yeah, from north to south. Yeah. Okay. So Shnaim she'ischilu be'emtza hashura. So two guys went into the middle of the row. Ze panav letzafan v'ze panav ledarom, and one was facing north and one was facing south. V'shachachu lifneihem u'la'achareihem, and they forgot what they forgot. Each one forgot a sheaf that was behind him and a sheaf that was in front of him. Okay. Now, if you take a look at the diagram that Gahati's helpfully put over here, the one guy started out between 7 and 8, and the other guy started out between 8 and 9. They weren't actually touching each other, but they left. So in other words, they're back to back, and number 8 is behind both of their backs.
So they left that one out.
So each one of them forgot number 8. Okay, so but they also forgot, but they they looked ahead and didn't see one of the sheaves and thought, I've got to pick up 6 sheaves now. So he hasn't yet passed it. But he says, oh, I've got 6 sheaves, and he's forgotten that there's a 7th one in the other direction. Okay, so now Eschilifnehem shicha v'shachachu lifnehem u'la'achreihem. Eschilifnehem shicha ve'eschila'achreihem eino shicha. So whatever is ahead of them, if they pass it by, and they didn't pick it up, then that is considered shekha, because now he's passed it by and he forgot about it. That's called shekha. But the one behind it, number 8, in other words, that one that was behind him over there, that's not considered shekha because neither of them actually started by it. And you'll see we'll have a rule that explains this again more clearly later in the Mishnah.
Now you said they were both between 7 and 8 and 8 and 9.
Yes.
And they're supposed to start at 7, but instead they really started at 6. One started at 6 and one started at 10.
No, I meant the count. I meant the count of sheaves.
Okay.
Never mind. I actually said it wrong. Let me re-describe it. One is that Reuven standing between 7 and 8, Shimon standing between 8 and 9, and they're facing opposite directions. And so the ones that are in front of them, if they pass them by and forget something, then that's called shekha. Okay, but number 8, which was never in front of them,
it was
never in front of either of them, it was behind both of them always, that's never considered shikha.
But they can't go back to it either.
Oh, but they can go back to it.
They can go back to it.
They can go back to it. That's the point of shikha, is that you're allowed to go back and fetch something that's not shikha, but if it is shikha, he can't go back to fetch it.
So 7 and 9 they could not go back to, but 8 they
correct.
could go back.
That's correct. Okay. Yachid shehischil meirosh hashura. Now, if you have a single harvester who's standing at the beginning, let's say he's standing before number 1, v'shachach lefanav ula acharav, Um, and he starts walking down the row, and now let's say he gets halfway down the row, and it turns out he's forgotten one that was behind him, and he's forgotten one that was in front of him. שלפניו אינו שכחה ולאחריו שכחה. So let's say he gets to point number 7, and he forgot number 5, and he's also forgotten that there's number 10 ahead of him. So number 5 is considered shikha. He's passed it.
Right.
Number 10 is not shikha because he hasn't passed it. Okay? Mipnei shehu beval tashuv. There's an isser to return to something that he's forgotten. But we're medayik on the word tashuv. You're not allowed to return to it. Okay? Zeh haklal. So now this is your rule. Kol shehu beval tashuv. Anything that you can't return to. Right? That's called shikha. If you're not returning to it because you were never there in the first place, that's not considered shekha unless you've actually passed it. So I mean, somehow I feel like the Mishnah could have been a little bit more clear about this by saying that if you haven't passed it, then it's not shekha, because that seems to be what it boils down to.
Right. Okay.
And what's also very confusing about the language of this Mishnah is in the first part of the Mishnah it talks about achreihem lifneihem ula achreihem, in terms of the things that's in front of them that they're going to pass, and the things that are behind them are the things that they've never passed. Whereas in the end of the Mishnah we talk about lifneihem ula achreihem as whatever you haven't yet passed, and things that you have passed. So it's it's a very confusing wording in the Mishnah, and I'm not going to be so chutzpahdik as to criticize Rabbi Yehuda Nasi for laying it out in this particular way with this particular wording, because I'm sure he has some inscrutable logic behind it. But it's maybe it was just to make it maybe the clash in the wording was just to make it more memorable. That could have been what he was going through and thinking of. How can I make people remember this? Make it easy to remember this Mishnah by making the wording confusing and remembering that it means something different at the beginning and the end. I don't know.
It sounds like only one person is doing this at a time. But can 2, 3, 5 people be going down the row?
Yeah, well, typically, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to have people stepping on each other's toes. If you've got a lot of harvesters, then send each one on a different row.
Right.
And then each one's responsible for his row. And if he forgets something, then that's shikha.
That's just right. Okay. All right.
All right, Mishnah Hey. Shnei Omarim shikha ushlosha einan shikha. Now, if you have two heaps, that can be shikha. Okay, but shlosha einan shikha. But 3 heaps is too much to be considered shikha. It's either because it's too much of a loss for the Baal Bayis, or because it is it's too significant to assume that somebody could have forgotten that that much. Okay. Similarly, in different types of crops, there's a rule of 2 and 3. 2 will belong to the aniyim and 3 will belong to the Baal Bayis. So shnei tziburei zeisim v'charuvin shicha ushlosha einan shicha. Same thing. So for bundles of olives or carobs that have been harvested, if you have two piles, that's also shicha, but 3 is not. Shnei hutznei pishtan shicha ushlosha einan shicha. 2 piles of flax. Now, flax, let us take a pause for a second and say, like, hold on a second. Why is flax in the story over here? Flax is not an edible crop. But we're talking about flax that's produced seed, because flax seed is edible.
It's edible, right.
Okay, so that's what our Mishnah must be talking about. Shnei gargarim peret, talking about grapes now in the vineyard. If you've left behind two grapes, that's called peret, but 3 is not peret. If it okay, shnei shibolim leket, 2 ears of grain is considered leket. V'shalosh enan leket. So this applies not only to shicha but also to leket and to peret, things that you cut and fell on the ground, as we learned before. Okay. So the rule over here is all elu kedivrei Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel is the one that has the rule of 2 and 3, where 2 belongs to aniyim and 3 belongs to the Baal Bayis. Al kulan Beis Shammai omrim shlosha la'aniyim v'arba leBaal Bayis. And across the board, Beis Shammai disagree and say that 3 is for the aniyim still, and 4 is for the Baal Habayis. Um, so they have Gehati explains the reasoning of Beis Hillel. They take it from a pasuk la'ani v'lager ta'azov asam, because it says ani and ger, so that's one for the ani and one for the ger, and that's 2. Okay, so therefore 2 goes to the aniyim. And Beis Shammai learn it from a different pasuk. They learn from the pasuk in Devarim. Lager le'asum v'la almana yiyeh. So now there are 3 types of aniyim. Okay, so what does Beis Hillel do with this yasum almana? That the yasum and almana are both included in the term of ani that was in the previous pasuk in Vayikra. Okay, so this explains the basis of their disagreement. Now, that's if you recall what we learned in the first Mishnah that you did Chazara on today was where Beis Shammai was talking about one haystack that's 4. Why do they go for 4 and not 3? Because their shita is that 4 belongs to the Baal Habayis.
Right. Okay.
Okay, not 3, and that's why. So that's why they were talking about the haystack that's 4 kavin. As opposed to, and is that called shicha? And Beis Hillel even hold it the 4, which if Beis Hillel holds that 3 is for the Baal Habayis, and surely they would hold for 4. But they say no, it's this is 2. It's still considered one haystack, of 4 kav. However, this limitation that we had of when you have an extra large haystack, still being liable to shicha. That it has a limitation when it gets too big, as we'll see in Mishnah Vav now. Now we're talking about a haystack. We're not just talking about a pile of grain over here. We're talking about a haystack. Nice big pile, and the minimum measure of this is called 2 se'ah. Okay, a se'ah, and we're talking about that's about 26 liters. Okay, so that's talking about a respectable pile. It's not huge. But 2 se'ah is about 26 liters, as opposed to a kav. Now I think it's 4 kav to se'ah. So what we were talking about in Mishnah Aleph was talking about half that size, and that's not considered, and that is still liable to shicha. We don't consider this shicha. It's too big and important to be forgotten. Okay, Shnei Omarim Ubahem Sa'asayim. But if you have two stacks, and between the 2 of them you've got 2 se'ah. So each one is 1 se'ah, let's say, or 4 kav. Okay. Rabban Gamliel Omer LeBaal Habayis. He says, Rabban Gamliel says, no, this is also not shicha. No, this is shicha. Say the Chachamim. Amar Rabban Gamliel, v'chi merov ha'omerim yupi koach shel Baal Habayis ohura kocho. I don't understand, says Rabban Gamliel. In the previous Mishnah, we just said that if you have more bundles, that strengthens the hand of the Baal Habayis. Because if you had 2, it goes to the aniyim, but if you have 3, it goes to the Baal Habayis. Now you had 1 stack that everyone said was to the Baal Habayis. Now you got 2 stacks, and you're telling me that it's now going to the aniyim. Okay. So Amrulo Yopikocho, they agree with him. Yeah, the more stacks there are, the stronger the hand is of the Baal Habayis. Amar lahim ma im bizman shehu omer echad ubosa asayim ushchacho. So if you got one pile that's sasayim and he forgot it, eno shicha, and we all agree that that's not shicha. Shnei omerim ubahem sasayim eno din shelo yu shicha. So if you've got the same amount, but it's now split into 2, doesn't the number make it a stronger claim that it should still remain with the Baal Habayis? Amrulo, no, your logic's bad. Why? Because we're talking about one massive pile, which is like a haystack. Okay. But now you split it into 2 smaller pieces, and now because each one is a smaller size, they're dwindled in significance where it's no longer haystack size; they're now forgettable size each. So therefore, your kal v'chomer does not hold. Okay. Next.
Okay.
Okay, Gimel Zayin.
No, give us sign. If a mortally ill person assigns his property in writing and he left any land for whatever, his gift is valid. If he did not leave any land at all, his gift is not valid. If a person assigns his property in writing to his sons and he assigned to his wife any plot of land, she has lost a chasuba. Rabbi Yossi says if she accepted, then even though she did not assign to her, she has lost a ketubah. If a person assigns his property in writing to a slave, he goes a free man. If he left any amount of land, he does not go a free man. Rabbi Shimon says he's always a free man unless, behold, all my property is given to the person so and so, my slave, except for 1/10,000 of it. He leaves over the quarter portion. So then,
Well, he's leaving it over basically. He's yanking his slave's chain.
right, because he can't be
Yeah.
free now.
Right, because there's anything that he's keeping possession of the slave, and even if he gives something into his slave's possession, it's like passing it from his right hand to his left hand.
Right.
It hasn't moved.
The Peah is given while attached to the soil. In the case of suspended vines and palm trees, the householder takes down and distributes to the poor. Rabbi Shimon says so too in the case of smooth nut trees. Even if 99 say to distribute and one says to snatch, this one they heed, for he spoke according to the law.
Right, so this is talking about switching back to the regular field at the end of the Mishnah.
Right.
That in general a normal field is every man for himself, and even if everyone else wants the balabais to do the distribution, we listen to the guy who says nah, every man for himself, and because he's saying the correct halacha.
Question
Okay.
before we go on. Someone said to me, let's say you live in Kutzel Arts and you have a fruit you never had before. You have an apple. You haven't eaten an apple the whole year. And now Shemitah is coming. You make a shekigonu on that. And then, right? So I was talking about figs. I said, we have to remember if we have the figs, we have to make a shekigonu on it. So he said, you have to know if it was made in this Eretz Yisrael or if it was the sixth year, or it's coming from the new year. Otherwise, you can't make a shekigonu on it. But I didn't think it mattered whether it was made in the fruit came from Eretz Yisrael or not.
I've not heard that before. I can understand why that might be a consideration, because you consider, you've got to master the different years' crops separately. But in terms of a shechianu, I don't see why it would make a difference.
Right, that's why I couldn't figure out why either. I have to ask him when I see him later, because
I'm not saying for sure not. I just don't see this far.
I never heard anything about the fruit has to be from Eretz Yisrael to make a shechianu. It would be any fruit that you haven't had in a year.
You can make shechianu on fruit that isn't from Eretz Yisrael. So
right,
I don't know.
Unless I misunderstood something, but all right.
Yeah.
But the 6th year, so that's and the 7th year would make a difference. Or was it the 5th and the 6th?
7th year is obviously Shemitah.
Right.
There you got to be concerned. You're not allowed to have Shemitah produce outside of Eretz Yisrael.
Outside of Eretz Yisrael, right. Outside. Wait a second. Fruit. If I'm in Kutzel Arts and the fruit does not come from Eretz, the fruit comes from Eretz Yisrael, you can't.
And that was one of Ashley Blaker's great jokes. When he was working at the BBC. At one time, he says he was sitting. He was inside the BBC offices, and somebody was going to the shops to go and buy supplies, and he asked to get some cucumbers for him. And then he suddenly thought, wait, it's a Shemitah, and he knows that Israel exports cucumbers during the Shemitah year, Shelo Kalacha.
Right.
So as the guy's leaving, he reaches out and calls out across the office, just make sure the cucumbers aren't from Israel. And he was very popular in the BBC offices thereafter.
We used to get in America. We used to get from Costco, the big store Costco. They used to have like peppers, and then everybody was looking to see if it came from Carmel, came from Eretz Yisrael, or it came from Mexico. Everybody got the Mexican ones. They put the other ones back. So it says right on the package. All right.
Tim, base
yud. Dung vessels and mud vessels through which the roots can go out do not render plants susceptible to tumah. Tumah. Out of the flower pot, it is tahor. Reb Shimon says, what is the basis for purifying it? Rather, the tame portion remains with its
You're going
truma.
backwards.
That's why it didn't sound right. It didn't sound right. One didn't. Oh my gosh. All right, let's do this again. Dung vessels and mud vessels through which roots can go out do not render plants susceptible to tumor. A perforated flower pot does not render plants susceptible to tumor, but one that is not perforated does render plants susceptible to tumor. What is the minimum measure of the hole? Large enough that a small root can go through it. If one filled it with soil to its edge, it is like a board that has no rim.
Okay, which means, of course, that it's not susceptible to tumor once
Right.
it's been filled like that.
There are some
Okay.
items that require hexture but do not require thought, others that require thought and hexture, others that require thought but not hexture, and others neither hexture nor thought. All foods that are normally used for consumption by humans require hexture but do not require thought. One cuts off flesh from a person or from a domesticated animal or from a wild animal or from fowl or from the carcass of a non-kosher bird and caliph in the villages and all other field greens with the exception of shmachim and mushrooms. Reb Yehuda says with the exception of field leek, purslane, and parsley. Reb Shimon says with the exception of cardones. Reb Yossi says with the exception of calusin. These require thought and hexture.
Okay. The basic rule being like what is considered edible. Because if something is a proper food, then automatically it's susceptible. But if it's not a commonly eaten thing, then you're going to require a thought to make it into something edible. Mikvos a gimel.
Yeah, edible meaning that not just in its form, whether you're going to use it to cook with or something like that.
Either way.
Right.
Whether it's raw or cookable, if it's something that's normally eaten, then it's automatically then you don't need machshava because that's the stam case. But if it's something that's not normally eaten, then you need a machshava to make it susceptible.
Is cookable a word?
Cookable? Why not?
I never heard that. Cookable. Okay. But maybe from England. So, yeah, no, South Africa. I mean. So.
Okay.
If the water of a spring branched out resembling a centipede and one added to it and thus caused it to flow further, it remains as it was. But if it was standing water and one added to it and thus caused it to flow, then it is equal to a mikveh in that it purifies only with still water, and it is equal to a spring that one may immerse things therein, whatever its amount.
Right. So if it's flowing, so if it is still, then you've got it. Then you're going to have the minimum share of 40 sa'at. So it's going to have to be a mikveh. But if it is flowing, then your minimum share falls away.
All the seas are like a mikveh, and it is said, the gathering mikveh of waters he called seas. These are the words of Rav Meah. Rabbi Yehuda says only the great sea is like a mikveh, and it says seas only because it contains many kinds of seas. Rabbi Yossi says all the seas can purify while flowing, but they are unfit for zavim and for mitzorim and for consecrating therefrom purification water.
Right, so that we said was the important, very practical case of waves on the beach, right? Because the sea, right. So the sea that's flowing. It's not pooled. So can you tovel your kalim in a wave that's washing up on the beach? So according to Rabbi Yossi, yes. Right. And I think that is the halacha, is that you can tovel inside the wave that's washed up on the beach.
Flowing water is like a spring, and trickling water is like a mikveh. Red Tzadok testified that when the flowing water is more than the trickling water, it's valid. And if trickling water was made to flow, it may be blocked even with a stick or with even a cane or even by a zav or a zava, and then one may go down and immerse himself. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says one may not stop a flow with anything that is susceptible to tumah.
Okay. Kalim Beis Aleph.
Wooden utensils, leather utensils, bone utensils, and glass utensils. Their flatwares are tahor, but their hollowwares are tameh. And when we're talking about the hollowwares, we're talking like if you take a spoon. We're talking about the spoon, the part that would pick up the soup, let's say.
Well, once you've got a receptacle inside the kli, then the whole kli is susceptible to tumor, including the handle. It's a yad,
Uh,
right? A yad is also part of the kli. Um,
would the tumor necessarily start where the where the soup would go into, or if it starts from the handle down? It doesn't matter.
Well, so we have a discussion later on about how long the handle can be. Like if the handle is longer than it needs to be, then the end of that isn't necessary for the kli is not susceptible to tumor. But
Mhm.
everything that where it is necessary, that's still susceptible to tumor.
Okay.
And if you touch it there, even on a wooden kli, even though the handle itself is pshute clay 8, but it's attached as a handle to something that has a receptacle, that's susceptible to tumor.
The flatwares are tahor, but the hollowwares are tameh. If they break, they become tahor. If one remade the broken vessels into newer utensils, they are susceptible to tumor from then on.
Right. So
Earthenware
that's an important thing to remember about, and this distinguishes wooden utensils from metal utensils. Remember, we learn about the metal utensils later, but this is an important distinction to bear in mind, that the wooden utensil, if a wooden utensil breaks, and now you take glue, so if it was tame before and then it broke, it's now tahor.
Mhm.
Now you take some wood glue and you stick it together so it's good as new, it's tahor still. It'll be makabel tumah from now on, but it doesn't have its old tumah.
Right.
Whereas with metal utensils, they paskined that it should return to its original tumah if you melted it down and then reformed it, because they didn't want people to cut corners, because it's so easy to melt down and reform a metal utensil. That it's a lot easier than waiting 7 days and sprinkling it with the paraduma and taking it to mikveh. So people would take the shortcuts, and they said, okay, no, we're paskening that the original tumah comes back if you do that.
So that's it. Earthenware vessels and Nessa utensils are identical in their laws of tumah. They contract tumah and transmit tumah through air, via airspace. They contract tumah via a receptacle in their interior. They do not contract tumah via their exterior. And then the breaker is their tahara.
Right. The only way to be matar a clay vessel, at least an earthenware vessel, is by breaking it. If you take a kli cheres and put it in the mikveh, doesn't help.
Right, right.
It stays
Okay,
tameh. Right. The only way it can be purified is by breaking it.
okay, okay. The smallest of the earthenware utensils and their bottoms or walls, which can rest without support, the measure for susceptibility to tumor is from enough oil to anoint an infant and up to a log.
Right. So this over here is talking about when if something gets broken, or is this when they're yeah, when they get broken, but they've still got pieces that are usable.
Mhm.
So we're saying what's the minimum shear of something that can still be usable for it still to be susceptible to tumor.
And there's a list here of different types of utensils, the barrels.
Hmm.
Um, Utensils containing from a log up to a saw are measured with a quarter log. Utensils containing a saw up to two saw are measured with a half log. Utensils containing two saw to up to three and up to five saw are measured with a log. These are the words of Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva says, I do not assign them a measurement, rather small earthenware utensils and their bottoms or walls which can rest without support. The measure for contraction of tumor is enough oil to anoint an infant. And this applies up to utensils the size of small pots. Utensils from the size of small pots up to loadium barrels are measured with a core log. Utensils from the size of loadium barrels up to the lech mayim, no, lech mian barrels are measured with a half log, and utensils from the size of lech mayim barrels up to a large cask are measured with a log. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says large casks, their measures are 2 lugim, Galilean flasks and small barrels are the measure from the bottoms to the smaller amount, and they have no walls. Okay. All right. These are tahor among the earthenware utensils: a tray that has no rim, an open-sided fire pan, a toaster's pan, pipes, even though they are bent and even though they are capable of containing a kakav made for a bread basket, a tefi which was adapted for covering grapes, a barrel for swimmers, a barrel-shaped handle set into the wall near the bottom of a machatz, a bed, a chair, a table, a bench, a table, a ship, and a candelabra, all made of earthenware, are tahor. This is the general rule. Any of the earthenware utensils which have no interior have no degree of tumah upon their exterior.
Right. So all these cases were kalim, the kalim made out of cheres, but they're not made as containers.
Mm.
So even though they're like a float, a float obviously contains air, but it's not meant to contain. It's sealed and it's never. So it's never going to have anything on its interior, so it'll never be susceptible to tumor.
The earthenware, what they call a ship, is intended to serve as a container to transport merchandise and passengers. But even though it's impervious to tumor.
But a ship is a different story. There's a different limit as to why a ship cannot become tame because it's on the sea. It's compared to the sea itself. Just as the sea cannot become tame, so the ship cannot become tame.
Right.
Okay. Baba Bastra based Dalit.
That's something that Shlomo said, I think. He said in there, right?
I don't remember. I've already closed my kalim. Sorry.
You close your kalim. Dalit. One whose wall was near the wall of another may not place another wall near it unless it distances 4 cubits from it. And with regard to windows, he must leave 4 cubits above and then below and opposite.
So he can't infringe on the space that his neighbor's entitled to.
One must distance a ladder 4 amat from a dovecote so that a marten should not spring into it, and a wall 4 amat from a gutter so that he cannot stand a ladder there. One must
so he can stand a ladder there.
I said can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
He can't stand a ladder there. One must distance a dovecote 50 amat from the town, and a man may not build a dovecote within his own property unless he owns 50 amat of land in every direction. The Yehuda says an area of 4 kar, the extent of a dove's flight. If he bought it, even if it was in an area of a quarter kav, it retained its standing.
Yeah. Okay. So the concern there, of course, is that the birds are going to go and eat his neighbor's seeds.
Right. A young dove which was found within 50 cubits of a dovecote belongs to the owner of the dovecote. Beyond 50 amat, it belongs to the finder. It was found between dovecotes. It was closer to this one. It is his. If it was closer to that one, it is his. If it was equidistant from both, they divide it.
Right. So that's a din in Hashavas Aveda that we bring in over here. And actually, this Mishna is quoted in the Gemara of Elam Matzias.
By the way, you talked about stealing the seeds. These 2 cats I have, he has separate eating bowls. I give cat A one. I give cat B the rest. His portion. Cat A gobbles that thing up like there's no tomorrow, and he goes after the other one. I keep telling him, get away. You had yours already. I'm fighting with him. So now I give the second one first. It doesn't matter. The other one eats faster. I can't, So now I have to keep one away, and I feed them in different places sometimes. I give him a little snack, and I give him dinner or something, Yeah, impossible.
Okay. Shkalim. Hey.
If someone lost his token, they would have him wait until the evening. If they found surplus funds for him corresponding to his token, they would give him the nesakim, but if not, nothing was given to him. If they were inscribed with a date because of the deceptive ones.
No, it's not an if. They did. They would.
You're right. I read it wrong. They were inscribed.
Right, because otherwise you might have speculators coming and buying tokens today so that they can use them tomorrow because they'll be cheaper, or they can sell them to people who need them tomorrow. And, do a little bit of arbitrage.
Nobody would do that. There were 2 collection chambers in the temple. One was called the chamber of the discreet, and the other was called the utensil chamber. What purpose did the chamber of the discreet serve? The God-fearing would deposit money into it quietly, and the poor sons of good families supported themselves from it discreetly. What purpose did the utensil chamber serve? Whoever pledged a utensil to the temple would toss it into this chamber, and once every 30 days, the treasury would open the chamber. Any utensils from which they found a use for the upkeep of the temple, they would leave. The remainder would be sold for their value, and the proceeds would go to the chamber, holding funds for the temple to the upkeep of the temple. There were 13 collection chests, 13 tables, and 13 prostrations in the temple. Members of Ram Gamliel's family and Reb Kananian's family would prostrate themselves 14 times. And where was the extra prostration? Opposite the wood chamber, for they had a tradition from the ancestors that the ark was hidden there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Wishing you a wonderful day.
Well. Yes, you too. It looks like it should be nice outside today.
Bezrat Hashem. Have a good day.
Yeah.